guess we'll start, maybe just start from the end, so you guys have arranged yourselves.
Okay.
All right, it's a little hard to see under the lights, but hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a good coffee break and have been having a good morning. I am Rebecca Christie from Bloomberg News in Brussels. Glad to be here at the TATRA Summit, and this panel is on Central European investment strategies. So to talk about this with you today, we have a wonderful lineup of 4 folks from all over the investment community. We are missing one of our panelists. Mr. Vilagi from Slovnaft was unable to join us today, so hopefully this means we can have a more lively conversation among those of us who are remaining, and I hope you guys will have lots of questions. So please be thinking of things that you can ask and conversations you want to have as we move forward. I think to get started, we will just have introductory remarks from each of our panelists, and once again, thank you for joining us. Gordon Beine, currently of Meridian, doing investment fund, will be our first speaker, I think, today, and you know what the topic is? Why don't you jump on in?
Well, thank you very much. I think we have a very broad panel here in terms of covering all aspects of investments, from startup venture capital, technology, and others. But the company that I'm representing is investing into major infrastructure projects in PPP. Meridian is one of the leading global investors in greenfield PPP projects. So that's the field that I'm looking at when we talk about Central and Eastern Europe as well. The question was how to stimulate growth and how to make investment here. The number one thing is to understand what is the bottleneck. Why is it not happening at a scale where it should happen? And very often, politicians, and I have been one for a while, so I know what I'm talking about, politicians are interested to come up and say, the money is missing, we will bring you the money. And then all kinds of numbers come up in the air. 100 billion, 1 billion, 300, 700 billion. Because that's easy to explain to the public, that I, as a politician, give you money for investment, for example. But if you look at the current environment, money is not the real shortage, that's not the bottleneck. We are seeing investment and financing at historic lows in terms of cost. There is an incredible amount of money because of quantitative easing, whatever you call it. So that's not really the issue. That is actually a risk. If governments start to believe that they have to take on more debt, while most governments in Europe are already strongly indebted, that they have to take on more debt to do the investments themselves, and therefore crowding out private investment, that's a real risk. So where is the bottleneck if it's not money? I think it's projects. In terms of infrastructure, definitely, but when you talk about Jeremy or SME funding, and we'll come to that as well, very often banks are complaining that they are awash with money and they cannot place it because they don't have good enough companies where they can hope the money to come back from. But that is certainly the case in terms of infrastructure. In infrastructure projects, what we are missing is good quality projects, which are well prepared, which are bankable, financeable. And what we lack is the management capacity, often from the public side, to prepare those projects, present them, and then co-manage it with the private sector. So if you ask me what is the biggest shortage at the moment that I see is the delivery of those projects where the private sector can invest, and then that could stimulate the economy and create jobs and growth.
Okay. Coming right up, we have our next speaker is Tobias Wenberg from Saab in Prague, and you are going to be talking about?
Actually, I think I'm going to tag along to where you started, because my background, although in industry now, my background is technology venture financing, and I think so I will start from a much smaller scale and try to have a bottom-up approach to what I think is important in order to build up a sustainable climate. And I still, even if we look at small businesses and what's needed to create a sustainable environment there, I think the problems are the same that you see on the infrastructure side, that the projects are missing or the project doesn't really match the investment strategies. I believe that needs to change, of course, in order for all solutions that we come up with being not only being short-term fixes, but being a bit more long-term. And that is important for entrepreneurs, it's important for regulators, and for investors as well. And on another side, we have been looking into, of course, the region. We have been present in the region for many, many years, and this part of Europe has largely been dependent on manufacturing, and it's been very much of an outsourcing zone for European and Asian industries. And that, of course, creates jobs, and it drives investments, but it drives investments in a very narrow lane, and it's not necessarily good in the long-term perspective for the local communities, and it doesn't necessarily support build up local competence and innovation. And of course, there are different drivers between what drives infrastructure investment and what drives business and business sustainability. But in order to have a solid, long-term, stable economic growth here in the region, I think it's important that it's not only focus on infrastructure and what the country needs in terms of the big project. You also need to have possibilities for entrepreneurs and owners of small businesses to grow their businesses locally, and then maybe expand out into the world, so that not all high-tech, innovative industry comes from other countries, which has been the case, I think. And in order to build up a stronger regional base that are not only dependent on foreign money and foreign decision-making, that's an important problem to solve for all parties involved, I would say. And I think we can see in the region a momentum and potential in developing technology and an innovative environment, and it can be competitive here, it can be competitive on an international scale, and that is something that needs to be leveraged upon in order to have a solid local growth, I think. And that's also to prove that and to make sure that that system is in place will also make investors more comfortable. There are challenges to overcome, of course, and one of those the keys is to sort of create a more solid community, I think, cooperation between all the stakeholders, a strategy from the government, not only in Slovakia but in the region, how they foresee the transition from being a manufacturing economy to a knowledge-based economy. How can you support and make it more comfortable for people to give up on unemployment and dare to start something new in an environment where unemployment is quite high already, and a little bit more long-term thinking, because if this is run short-term and with sort of limited vision on the future, it will be too risky, both for entrepreneurs and for investors to actually dare to do something new and to break new ground. And going back to that, I think it's also going back to the project side. I think it's important that it's not only one-way traffic. I mean, we're here to have an investor's approach to it, and that's fine. But money goes where it makes sense to put money at the end of the day. And there need to be projects, there need to be businesses to invest in that make sense, that can generate return on investment, because it's not, nobody invests out of charity. And the tools are there from the financial sector, I think, and the investors are here. It's a matter of creating prerequisites for objects to invest in, and strengthen the knowledge and strengthen the competence around that. And of course, that's a challenge for the investment community as well. But still, it's also for those based on the project side. And despite sort of great potential in the region, I think it's the output of development, innovation, and technology doesn't necessarily always correspond to commercial needs, and I think we will touch upon it a little bit later on. We had an interesting discussion before and how you guys are working on getting competence back into the country, and that is something I think that's very much needed. And cooperation, I think, also needs to be strengthened between academia and the government and the private sector in order to create a sort of a sustainable environment, whether it is within industry, IT, or any other sector where it makes sense to invest.
Thanks very much for that. Our next panelist.
Thank you. I think actually the topic of that conference is extremely relevant and well-defined. My personal perception of the world is that the two decisive dynamics that we can witness and see today are first, incredible amount of capital, which is really flowing to the market and wants to be used, wants to be put to work on one hand, but on the other hand, that capital is extremely selective. And it's extremely selective in two aspects. First of all, regional aspect, and second of all, segment aspect. So there are segments of industries where you have, again, enormous amount of capital, like infrastructure in stable, developed countries, where the demand side is just extreme. And we have seen projects which were finally priced and evaluated at maybe doubles or even triples of the originally expected price. So we see a great interest for infrastructure in conservative countries. We see great interest for innovative industries, internet typically. And then we see regions, countries, and segments where literally nobody wants to invest. We are seeing right now, for instance, in the energy sector, assets which are relatively new, maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, of good quality technologically, but people are willing to pay a fraction of the construction cost for the assets, maybe 1/10 or 1/5 of the price, which means that the investors who put the trust into these assets have made a completely wrong decision. So what is the takeaway of that of the general statement? First, we need to appreciate that really in today's world we have, and what we see is a global competition of regions. The capital, the global, the companies being investors and being industrial players who are definitely investing effectively more even than the financial investors. They are behaving in a global way. They are comparing different investment opportunities. They are always evaluating whether they would develop their own production in this country, whether it would be Asia, whether it would be Turkey, whether it would be Slovakia, whether it would be Romania. And they are really internally in their companies benchmarking carefully the different cases. And also the investors got substantially more global than it was before. Many infrastructure funds or pension funds and insurance funds were before focused in terms of Europe, primarily on UK, later on in Germany. In today's world, they are able to invest also in different countries. The takeaway from that is that each individual state has to work and exert all the best effort to be on the blue chip side. To be very frank, this is not the case of Slovakia today. Slovakia is not on the bad side, but definitely not on the blue chip side. Hungary, thanks to the latest development, despite the fact that I'm very far from being critical to anything I do not understand in details, for instance, got really on the bad side right now. So in Hungary, typically energy infrastructure can be bought for maybe 1/3, 1/4 of what it was worth 4 years ago. And the trust of investors in infrastructure has been, standard Western European and US investors has been ruined. And I think all the politicians in the region have to be aware of the fact that if they will once ruin the trust of the investors, the country will pay an enormous bill in the years to come. The capital will not flow into these countries. And it is not only a question of infrastructure, but it's much broader. Simply, we will see what we are already seeing today, countries who are attracting capital, countries who see new investments in production, ideally new investments in know-how based projects and economy, and these countries will be rising and developing in a positive direction. The other ones which will not be on the good side will suffer, and we'll see a very different situation. So that's one statement. The other statement, each state shall have ideally, and I know that this is extremely difficult, especially in states which are not established for centuries like the UK, but each state ideally shall have a view on what sorts of industries and what segments it wants to develop. It should really focus on communication with the investors in these domains, and shall try to promote and help so that the conditions in the segment that it wants to develop are really as good as can be. This is true both at national level and European level, and maybe we can talk about this later. For instance, the European energy sector, typically the power generation sector, which has been for years almost the backbone of European industry, and has created enormous amount of further jobs also in the related industries, effectively, or energy demanding industries, has been ruined. This has been partially ruined by the European policy and partially ruined by certain national policy. The state that has really put his blue chip companies practically on the knees, and can be quoted here, is Germany. If you look and you carefully study the numbers of German companies, energy companies, they are literally on the knees. And but in case of Germany, it was a deliberate decision. Again, the overall takeaway is that capital is selective for countries, is selective for segment. Each country has to take it extremely seriously and shall behave according to that. Ideally shall have a strategy also for the segment, so that it does the best for the regional reputation from the regional perspective, and also knows what kind of segments it wants to promote and attract capital. And differences are already major today, and we will see the impacts even more in the future.
Okay.
Okay, so it's quite difficult to speak about after you, because you just took the very global or regional approach. So I will try to put the Slovak perspective on the table. I mean, two of you have mentioned that there is too much money on the table. Yes, well, it depends where and in which sector. I represent the sector of financial sector, which is called venture capital, which has no tradition in Slovakia. For 25 years, venture capital was not present in Slovakia. Since Slovakia or Bratislava is the least important, excuse me, but it's not very politically correct, but it's the least important capital in the region. I mean, each of the capitals which are surrounding Slovakia are more important by population or economy, so Budapest, Vienna, Prague, and Warsaw. So venture capital companies have been seated there, and they were covering Slovakia like once a month. Somebody came to Bratislava here in this hotel or another one and asked me, so Ivan, what's new in technological field? And it's not a way how you can do the venture capital, because it's a very local business. You have to know what is going on, which are the laboratories, where is the innovation, what are the apps which have been produced here, what are the good talents which are here. So that's why we have decided with my friends to create a venture capital company, a private one, and to reinvent or to invent venture capital here. So we were trying to fundraise capital in our fund, and we just visited all the banks here in Bratislava, which are like daughters of the daughters, you know, so they are not, in fact, I mean, I cannot remember a bank which is like deciding about their investment policy in Bratislava. So we were trying to fundraise there, and like the basic answer was that you know, it's like in Slovakia it's called risk capital. So in fact, like a risk, so it means that we cannot go into risky business because we are a bank. So that's why we are trying to call it venture capital in a way that it's like less negative. So now we have a fund with 40 investors. One of them is the biggest one is the European Investment Fund, which have made a due diligence of ours. So it lasted like 2 years, more or less. But it was very good because we prepared a big and good project, I hope. and with the approval and the stamp of the European Investment Fund, we could fundraise with other private investors. And we succeeded to have 39 other private investors. Like lot of them are people coming from Slovakia, which have built their companies without venture capital. So they bootstrapped. So the local big companies like Asset and I don't know, name them, all of the precious one which we have in Slovakia from the technological fields, either the owners or the companies are our LPs, so our investors, and they have invested for two reasons. Why? Because the first reason is because they thought that it's a good investment opportunity, because there is a lot of talent in Slovakia, but a lack of capital in the technological field. And the second thing is a little bit of a national pride or give back to the company. So, I mean, I know that on an investment panel, I should not mention that some people are deciding to invest in something which is not only motivated by a pure economical like reason, but on the other hand, it helps because those people can help the companies then to grow. So now, finally, after the second closing, we will probably have one bank on the table. So normally it happens that you have like EIF, then you have the institutional investors like banks and insurances, and then in the second closing you attract the local investment stars. In Slovakia, we have made it the other way around. On the other hand, what was the problem, and that I'm coming to a broader question, is that our fund is like mainly because the European Investment Fund and some European funds were involved in it, we can invest only in Slovakia. But Slovakia is a 5 million inhabitant country, and sometimes the interconnection between the companies in the region are too big. So, for example, a company is composed of 5 Slovaks, but based in Brno, in Czech Republic, or like 4 Hungarian Slovaks, which are based in Budapest, for example. And we see that it's not good to create only Slovak venture capital fund. In the future, we would like to more focus on creating a regional fund, and I think that the V4 should be a little bit more focused also on this aspect to create a structure, how to create some kind of like V4 brand and V4 investment playground. Let's call it like that. I have some other points. I don't want to speak too much on the beginning, so probably.
It's a great introduction. I'm struck by the theme among the 4 panelists, which is that people are waiting on the sidelines, waiting for some reason to get involved. We've heard that it might be a lack of projects, it might be a concern about long-term prospects, it might be a concern that assets are not going at their full market value, that things are still going for fire sale values, or in your case, we're talking about borders here. And there's also the question of the role of banking versus more risk-taking financing. So, with those things in mind, I guess I'd like to throw it back out to the panel just to ask if there are ways around these things, or if you disagree that some of these are obstacles. I mean, you were certainly saying it's projects, projects, and more projects, whereas we're hearing here that there are other issues at stake that are keeping people from taking that first step. So would you like to respond? We'll just go back down the line.
Well, it's easy to say projects, but you have the lack of projects, but you have to see the underlying reasons. And one is sort of the capacity, the government capacity in our case, because we are working on PPP projects, so the government's capacity to prepare those projects, that's one thing. The other one is, which is maybe more common with even sort of SME funding or venture capital, is regulatory environment, or the one that you mentioned about the energy sector. It's a no-brainer that if you want to attract capital, you have to offer a stable and calculable future. And the crisis did not help that at all. Every time when there is a big crisis, politics becomes incredibly volatile. Populism increases, isms in general, nationalism, populism, and even worse isms sometimes, fascism and communism. can raise in a big crisis like in the 1930s. Isms are not good for business and not good for stable growth. So populism is a big danger, and political volatility is a big danger for long-term growth in these countries and attracting investment. So regulatory environment, political stability, and institutional capacity to manage and prepare the ground are essential for these projects. And where sometimes money is lacking, at least definitely in the infrastructure, is probably elsewhere, is a little bit of money, not hundreds of millions of euros or billions of euros, but maybe the tens of millions to prepare those projects. So very often the best use of public funds is to spend on preparing those projects or regulations or institutional development. And actually the EU funds are there in these countries in Central and Eastern Europe, the structural funds that should enable that. So that is what I think is the underlying missing factor. And long term, the question whether these countries can emerge to their 25-year-old dream, the sort of European standard, because in 1990 all of us believed in these countries that it's just a matter of a few years and we will emerge to what we call Western Europe at the time. Now, there was a great political scientist, sociologist, Ralph Dahrendorf, who once visited Budapest and said in an interview, to change the political system, it takes 6 months. To change the economic system, it takes 6 years. But to change society, it takes 60 years. And now we are in year 25. And the road has not been so linear to go from a former communist country to be a sort of fully fledged Western European country, as we dreamed of, as my generation has dreamed of. It's not linear at all, and each and every country in the region had their zigzags. Slovakia in the 90s, Poland had it in the mid-2000s, Czech Republic had some zigs and some zags, and Hungary had a long linear period of development, and then, so I'm referring back to your question, it was in a long zig and now it's in a long zag. But I hope it's just a zigzag, and because the dream of my generation was to go and have a sort of linear and quick development emergence to the target that we have set for ourselves. Now, why I'm saying this long sort of thought, the takeaway of that, the conclusion of that is the quality of governance is what will long-term decide the future of these countries. It is not the way my thinking has changed and my generation has changed, that in 1990 we all saw that it's written in the stars, that we now will have to become sort of fully fledged Western European style democracies and market economies. It's not written in our stars. Some countries will make it and some countries won't. And this what this crisis has shown, that the directions can be very different. And the quality of governance and the way people choose that government and keep or change those governments will decide the fate of these countries. And it's not written in the stars. Some countries may go down a long way down, and some countries can emerge successfully. So governance will be the key issue here, and good governance can attract capital. Capital can make, if it's governed well, can raise these countries.
Thanks. Daniel, you brought up national differences. What do you think might be a way around this? Do you think the EU can do more? Do you think the EU is doing too much? Do you see a regulatory collision there?
First, I will need to make a short remark. If I could, I would love to sign what you have said in all aspects. Back to your question. EU has, of course, contributed in a major way to call it, or to more, not necessarily, on one hand, quality and definitely perception of Central European countries as investment environments. What we have seen very clearly, that the appetite of foreign investors, typically, as I would used, the term Western capital has dramatically risen after our countries have joined the EU. And of course, the mandatory harmonization of our legislation have put in place all the institutions which are effectively necessary in order to create a good investment environment. So the historical contribution was a major one. Personally, the problem which I see today is that, and hopefully it will change, but at least in the last years, my feeling, and I would be keen to learn your view indeed, is that European Commission has, in certain aspects, and again, it has been changed in the last period, and I hope the new Commission will make a follow-up to the latest trend, has really a little bit missed the point. And it talked for longly and longly, generally about protecting environment, protecting employees, protecting all sorts of non-economic quality of our lives, and has really forgotten about competitiveness of European economy. And many of the measures that have been taken just dramatically increase the cost of production in Europe, and we have seen already many industries moving from Europe to other countries. Just very simply, and again, allow me to take an example from my own profession. Energy demanding industry in Europe, 10 million employees. The 10 million employees are really in danger. Effectively, for most of the producers, it is more efficient to move into different geographies. And this is a direct employment of the energy consuming industry, which has been really practically attacked by EU policies. And therefore, I really believe that at the European level, we really must have the debate of adequate weight and accent put on protecting the acquis communautaire in all aspects, and on the other hand, making sure that Europe is still a generally competitive region, at least in the scale which is really needed in order to keep a certain quality of life and certain strength of economies. But again, that's a European level. Again, we feel, at least having the experience from the energy industry, we feel a bit frightened by certain developments over there. But on the other hand, there's so much that local governments and governments of individual countries can do, that definitely European policy is not an excuse and is not an explanation why investments are not flowing into a given country. So really, what I could only sign here, that capital will follow the quality of projects, but the massive projects in the massive industries, not in internet, for instance, where you can do it from your home and you can be in Bangladesh, but the massive projects which are interlinked with the quality of the local environment will be effectively created or killed by the quality of the government and the behavior of the government.
Tobias, how do you see that shaping up? And how does the quality of local government and the quality of the EU government interact in your world?
Well, it's a huge question, isn't it? But I agree. I mean, I agree with both of you in a sense, but there's only so much government can do. I mean, policy making, strategy, and the framework can be set by the government, and that's important, and it will always be important to have that framed in. But on the other side, that has to be met up by a reliable environment and a competent environment to put the money in. And if we look at on the business side and not necessarily only on the infrastructure side, to build investor confidence and to have a framework for that as well, that can be influenced by the government, but it cannot be created by the government. And if the government meddles in too much, at some point you get dangerously close to tampering with the market and the logic behind it, and that's definitely not good for business in the long-term perspective. I just want to tag along to what you said. I think it was interesting. What sprung into my head being from Sweden is that 25 years is nothing. Most of the...
It's our life.
But still, in this aspect, it's not that long. Most of the base industries in Sweden are inventions that are close to 100 years old. And Sweden's transition to a knowledge-based economy started maybe 40 years ago, and we are still not there. I read an interesting article a few weeks ago about music export from Sweden, which is a huge thing and everybody talks about. Still, annual music export from Sweden is more or less what Swedish-based industry produces from Monday morning until the 9 o'clock coffee break. So things need to be put in a time perspective as well in order to make sure that the region gets back on track.
Ivan, you're our optimist. What do you make of all of this?
No, so I want to be a little bit. I want to make a little bit the opposition to the big guys here. is that you know, in the pipeline of our venture capital fund, we have at least 3 companies which are really like at the top-notch level of the energy innovation. Those companies have a discussion with Statoil, BP, Aramco, the big energy guys. But when we were knocking on the doors of Slovnaft, the guy who had to be here, or probably your energy, we do not even know the address, whom to address. Do you have like innovation at eph.com or something like that? So there are many opportunities how to survive in this world without like doing the rough stuff. You can do energy also in a like intelligent way. I don't want to be the the little boy who will just advising the big bad guy. But on the other hand, I think that there is something true in this. So probably you could look on the local opportunities where I can like show you our books or our database where you can find really great innovations and which can, improve your, energy transport things or energy saving by 1%, but it is going to raise the profitability by 20%, for example. So that's one remark. The other remark I would like to say is that, and it's a big thing, is that our countries, we are 25 years after the revolution or the regime change, and many people have fled this country, and during the time or at the time when there was a possibility to travel and so on, and many great people are either studying or working outside of this region. And now finally there is a possibility to return back and to build something. I was studying in France, and I am 37 years old. When I speak to my French counterpart, what they are doing, they are assistants of assistants of assistants somewhere in the big companies. So I don't know which age are you, but probably you have the same age as I have, and you are the big guy, let's call it like that. So probably there is a much bigger possibility to realize yourself in this country where there is a lack of one generation. So probably they are going to have a bigger salary in London, but they cannot realize big dreams there. So in Knowledge and also in Knowledge Ventures, we are not doing only the venture capital, investing in a company and then like looking on the books, but we are trying to match the generation of Slovaks or Czechs or Hungarians which are in the West, have learned something and now returning back to this region. And this is a really big issue which we wanted to have, and each of the company in which we invest, we are trying to find a model of like East and West, because those and East and West skills, because I've been on the startup event, the biggest one in Central Europe, on the Pioneers Festival, and out of the 50 startups which were presented there, at least 5 were very similar to what we have in our pipeline. And the technological solutions were much, they were much weaker than the technological solution which we have, but they were much better presented, and they have had a better strategy. So what is the issue here in this region is to like structure the idea and to make some kind of like marketing and sales side about the idea. And the last thing I want to say in this block, if I may, is that we are coming back to the education, and probably it's not related to our topic, but I made a promise to myself that on every place where I will speak, I will mention it, is that we are really forgetting education. Of course, we will not have an instant result out of investing more into education, but in next 25 years, we could have. And we are lacking politicians which will find a way and which are enough young to be sure that they will see the results afterwards, to invest into much more structured and much more appropriate education. Because those people which I mentioned, which are returning back from the West, are much better educated than those who are like only technically educated. You know, so that's what I would really like to advise the politician to invest much better into education like it is now.
Once again, the cross-border answer. Daniel, you'd like to respond?
I just wanted to make one very short, one very short comment to what you've said. When I, at least, and I believe both of us talked about the role of the governments, this doesn't mean that the government has to be or shall be active in the business sphere, not at all. The key problem is predictability of the environment and a long-term strategy, and just two examples. For instance, in the whole infrastructure domain, the best thing what to do is not to do nothing, typically, if the ground is okay. In the UK, just to give you a flavor, in the UK, when they have took a certain decision concerning power generation sector, they have published in the year 2000, a power generation strategy for next 20 years. This is something which doesn't exist in our geography, but also not in Germany. It just doesn't exist. The rules are being changed every second, third year in a domain here, in a domain where a lifetime of the assets is 40 to 60 years. So you need to invest into an asset which shall last 40 to 60 years, and you see the regulation changing after 2 years. In the gas industry, and this is a problem at the European level, we have seen a new regulation coming in place in 2009 with the hope that that regulation will last at least for 10 years. Today, in 2014, we have already a major change and revolution on place. How you want to invest in infrastructure, when you don't have the predictability. So the question around the governments is predictability on one hand, quality of communication with the investors, and needs to appreciate that government needs also investors, ideally both local and foreign investors, because they can play different roles. And third, ideally it should have also strategy. Like for instance, Slovakia is greatly loved and preferred by the automotive sector. Well, it needs to have an appropriate system of education and making sure that really the schools are, producing or preparing sufficient number of employees to be employed in these companies later on. So it is not about, I'm definitely not promoting a concept whereby government would be actively involved in many businesses, not at all. It's a question of predictability and a long-term strategy to make sure that really Slovakia and all other countries can be successful in the global competition for capital rising and investments.
Yeah.
Just a quick,
what's the address where people with innovation can write it?
Okay, I'll give you, but just one thing to make it clear. For instance, we are following on every week basis, so that I give you a feedback how how the energy sector is working. Gas balance differences in the solar gas transmission system, and there we are not talking about 1%. We are talking about 0.01%. And it makes already a difference, and we are extremely focused on that. But definitely, I will give you the address, and I can even, show you some spheres where I believe a certain innovation has a certain room.
I just want to challenge your comment a bit. I think it was good that you described it as risk capital early on, because I think that is, in essence, what it is. And your job as an investor is to reduce risk in your investors' capital. And it's great that you're trying to get back people that have gained experiences outside of Slovakia and get them into your organization or into the system. But I think in what you're describing, I think you're idolizing a bit, because I think there's one missing part here. How do you trust the guy with the innovation? How can you make him credible? One of the reasons that, for instance, it's difficult, I would say, to get the local energy sector to look at local energy innovation is that when you talk to British Petroleum, they for sure have the knowledge to take care of that early on. They have people to put in that early venture from day one. And if local private equity or local venture expect that just to be grown out from the earth, that will not happen. That competence needs to be around the people who are starting something new. It needs to be available for them, because university graduates will not be ready to run businesses. They need support and they need help, and that help will give them credibility. And that credibility is what your investors need to take risk in those companies. And that's what the energy sector will need to take risk in those companies. It will not happen by itself.
Do we have any comments from the audience? If you do, please raise your hand high enough that I can see it. I see one back there and one here.
My name is Noam Garbiar. I'm a founding partner of a technology startup, high-tech technology startup in the area of machine learning, statistical modeling and predictive modeling. And I have never spoke to single potential investor who would not be interested in our idea. So just to challenge some things which were said here. And by coincidence, we also applied our know-how in the energy sector, and I've seen the disaster which is happening there, because they need now very good predictions. The point I want to make is that about the competitiveness of the European economy and also about well, what I want to say is that it's not a problem to attract capital for us, but where we are feeling very unsure is how we are going to sustain the company for next 1 or 2 years with very big costs in the social insurance and all the things, all the burden which government creates for the startup. And sometimes I feel that just government should get out of the way and let us do the things, because we have to do a lot of reporting. And also what is a problem I see is that very often there are big companies applying for EU funds, and they are able to attract new students, brains which we need in the company, but because they get some EU funds for the employment of young people, they are able to offer much better salaries than we are able to offer. And this is really damaging us, because then the only thing we can offer is maybe more modern and more cool environment, but that's it.
Right. Thank you very much for that comment and those observations on the role of government. We have another, perhaps a question from over here.
Thank you. TATRA Shah from the American Embassy. I appreciate Mr. Bainai's comments on the importance of good governance, because I've always heard and read that rule of law is a very important aspect of creating an environment that attracts investment. And if you look at the global competitiveness indexes like World Economic Forum, World Bank Ease of Doing Business, et cetera, that's consistently been a weakness identified in the Central European, Eastern European region. So I was a little, I'll say in front of State Secretary Hudak, I was a little disappointed that it was not mentioned in the first panel, but I'd like a reality check from the investors here. How important is transparency, lack of corruption, an accountable and fair judiciary to creating an investment climate? And what kind of possibilities do our panelists here see for that improving in this region in the coming years? Thank you.
Thanks for that. And we'll take a question right here in front, and then we'll go back to the panel. Thanks so much.
Jozef Badida, a journalist from portal Energie pre vás. Mr. Kšetinsky, you are also active in energy business. You just mentioned one very important thing, as I understood correctly, a state should not be active in economic business, in maybe you can explain more, because just recently you have sold the SPP to Slovak state, and Slovak state is also very interested in Slovenské elektrárne. So maybe can you explain your words, please?
Thanks for that. We'll start with that question right off.
Yes, clearly. No, that was my comment to my colleague's comment that I'm not promoting a system whereby government wants to take the responsibility of the business and try to really create everything in the economic domain. So that was a general comment. The fact, and I can comment even specifically on SPP, but and the situation, I'm more than happy to do that as long as you will give me the permission to do so. But the fact that government owns companies active in the backbone parts of the industry, typically infrastructure, is nothing wrong, and it does exist almost in all European countries. Effectively, the exception to that is UK, where UK state is really not holding too many assets, and to a certain extent Germany, but in Germany you have a major role of the local governments and local municipalities. So overall, the fact that public structures are holding interests in energy companies is something which is relatively very common, and I don't feel a reason to criticize that simple fact. By the way, Czech Republic has done for sure right that it kept its interest in ČEZ. The other thing is, of course, that the company has to be run not as a part of state structure, but has to be run in a professional way. In certain cases, I can even appreciate, but I disagree with the methods, but I can even appreciate current strategy of Hungary, where Hungary is trying to reacquire certain infrastructure assets, and very likely that investment strategy will be or could be successful in the future, because Hungary will be able to finance itself at a lower cost than the acquisition, that the implied return used for the valuation of the acquisition. The problem in Hungary is that Hungary is doing that as a part of broader strategy where it has ruined first the trust of the investors, it has completely destabilized the regulatory system, decreased the value of the assets, and then buying the assets completely depressed and under pressure. This is something which is not the right strategy. And again, personally and unfortunately, because I'm a great fan of Hungary, I'm convinced that Hungary will pay his major bill for that behavior. So that's my answer. No criticism that state has a direct interest in certain energy companies to the extent it is consistent with its strategy, and to the extent the companies are run in a professional mode.
Just to get to the other questions as well, Gordon, you might be in a position to maybe tackle the other two at once. We had one commenter saying that government is too involved in interfering in the role of businesses. We have another question saying, what are the responsibilities of government to provide an environment that is conducive to economic growth? So how do you get through those two conundrums?
Well, whether government should play a bigger or smaller role has been the center of debate of economists and political scientists for the last few hundred years, so I don't think we can solve it in this panel.
2 minutes.
All right. I can tell you my humble experience. When there is a crisis and there is a risk of the system falling, the whole system falling apart, then there is a natural role for governments to come and sort of stabilize the system. Once the crisis is going away, then there would be a natural, well, not natural, that would be unnatural, but it would be good if governments try to withdraw. Because in sort of reasonable circumstances, it's good if you allow the market forces to shape business and private sector. And governments should not compete in the private sector.
Initiative also.
And I have, in general, we have a lot of bad experience about the quality of governments trying to manage private businesses or private sector or compete with the private sector, misusing their power and their regulatory function. But this is a philosophical debate. I think it was right in the crisis for governments, even in the United States, the government, which was, people spoke about socialism and communism when the US government saved some of the automotive sector, GM, for example, but it sold it few years later, with a tremendous profit, by the way. And had they not saved that, a whole system of employment and subcontractors, probably millions of jobs would have been lost. So it's right, like if somebody has a heart attack, you need all kinds of evasive things, but you don't want the operation to continue for the rest of the life, every day. So that's my personal view, and in my country I would be then now addressed as a liberal, as a wild liberal. In some countries I would be seen probably from the other side. Certainly in Central and Eastern Europe, there was a huge wave of privatization in the 90s, most countries. And Hungary was the leading in that because we had the highest debt inherited. Slovakia, Czech Republic, and even Poland, because of the well-known factors, came out practically with zero or very little debt. But Hungary had a huge debt, so it had to privatize everything. It had pros and cons, because privatization brought in technology, know-how, and capital, which is missing in all of our economies. On the other hand, it sometimes went too far, and the government structures, and here I'm addressing the question from the US embassy, many times our governments were unable to protect the interest of the citizens of these countries, either because they were corrupt or they were not up to regulatory to deal with major multinational companies and know-how of regulations and technology. So very often we have created private monopolies. And as Margaret Thatcher said, there is only one thing worse than a public monopoly, it's a private monopoly. So that you want to avoid.
Ivan, how do you trust the government to get in and get out at the right time?
Right. I really, I agree that the government should be a good regulator. I mean, I really trust in the power of the government to be a regulator, because, like, I'm a political scientist by education, and I think that, putting that in the economical terms, I mean, every citizen of a state is a shareholder of the state, so you have some kind of corporate governance, and every year you have, or every 4 years, you can elect the people who are going to lead the ship. The problem is that, of course, we still have a lot of problems with corruption in this country. I have to admit that I'm lucky. I'm not very much touched by that, because the companies with which I'm working, I mean, they are not paying taxes yet, so I do not have to lobby to have a smaller taxes. On the other hand, I mean, there is no legislation in this region to deal with, like, complicated venture capital mechanisms. So, for example, in Slovakia, you do not have and I think not in Czech Republic, legal structure which is called a shareholder agreement. I mean, it's not mentioned yet. You have an article of association, but not a shareholder agreement. So you cannot agree what are the hidden mechanisms between the shareholder, why, how they are going to proceed after the investment and so on, because it's a new mechanism. So, for example, we, as a venture capital and startup community in Slovakia, we have a quite good cooperation with the Ministry of Finance and then other ministries to make a legislation which is going to help us to regulate ourselves and so on. So that's what I think is a very good and positive element. And then when our companies are going to pay taxes and need corruption, then I will start to negotiate different way.
What a milestone when you get big enough to apply for your own special loophole tax break. Tobias, I saw you had a comment.
Yeah,
there.
well, but now I was a little bit shocked here. I mean, I will get back to the corruption question, because I think it's crucial. But there is no legal framework for regulate shareholder rights. I mean, that
No, no,
do we?
it is. I would.
I mean, shareholder agreement as a
Shareholder agreement is not defined as a typical agreement
Okay.
or standard
Fair enough.
in
And
the
in the
commercial,
East
in the
part of
commercial
Slovakia?
code, but in practice you of course have them
Okay.
not in East
as a so-called
Slovakia.
denominated contracts.
Do we have any representatives from the government here? We could have a discussion later on.
No, it exists. It broadly exists.
But just touching upon it, I think it's the question from the U.S. Embassy. I think it's absolutely essential that the investment system is clean from corruption, because corruption is, from an investor's point of view, one thing. It's a disruption of logic, and it takes away, or it means that something is trying to divert or affect or in any way shape the logic, and that's of course not good. It can probably be considered to be a short-term fix and a short-term interest from time to time, but it cannot, in the long-term perspective, the system needs to be clean and decisions need to be based on logic. I think it's very simple.
Daniel, I can see you've got so many thoughts.
And at least just one very important, making follow-up to U.S. Embassy. It is not a question of just corruption. Everybody can agree on the destructive impacts of corruption, but the headline is rule of law, which is 1,000 times more than a broadly discussed corruption. And there I would say that clearly not only this region but also in cases Europe would need a lesson from the US and potentially UK. That's a whole system of protection of individual rights of people, and by the way also companies. And this is the basic prerequisite of predictability. So definitely this is something which we need. And by the way, if I now brutally transfer something which is substantially more broad and shall be the base of our lives and our society, this is also what the capital needs. So this is really extremely important. And I would love, by the way, also the US and also other states in the EU see screaming in each and individual cases when this is not being respected. And look at all the cases of special taxes for this, here, that in individual countries. Look on the decision shutting down nuclear power plants without compensation in Germany. You know, is this protection, is this rule of law?
There are a lot of working groups looking at all of these very
No, but you can.
Sometimes screaming seems like all they're doing.
But even the scream is not too strong, because unfortunately, and we need to appreciate this, rule of law as a basic, as maybe more important and more traditional element of liberal democratic society than the democratic part. So rule of law as a basic of any liberal system has been somehow mixed up with and it's often being mixed up with the debate of what we do tomorrow and what we do here and how we pay the specific bill. And here really we would need a lesson. We would need a clear lesson from you, and the lesson should be constantly coming over here, because we just don't have the tradition, and because rule of law as a key principle is being mixed up with things which has just a fraction of the importance.
Big question. Do we have more audience comments? Let's see. Okay, thank you. Sorry, if you do have a question, please raise your hand high enough that I can see it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I want to know when the time will come when the business in Visegrad region start hiring forecasters.
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 Anybody confident enough in the panel to
because this is the weakest
on the
point
future?
in Western ecospace. When you don't have forecasters, there's no one who can spot the seeds of new in the region, in the town, in the village.
I'm trying to forecast approximately 80% of my time.
So you are the lucky guy, but
I'm trying.
But there are very few lucky guys. So I want to know your meaning, how to promote this profession of forecaster, not on the government level, but on the enterprise level.
In our system, it's called analyst.
Yeah, I was,
And,
I would say
this
the
is
same.
really one of the key and very important profession that you need to have not only for acquisition but also for running any important or relevant business. So really, I understand the criticism, and I think really for the states and the strategies, probably more focus is needed on that domain. But really, in the business segment, I'm not accepting the blame here.
No, no, I agree.
Think really all we do is we try to think how the future will look like and how we will accommodate it.
The tools for the investor and the investment manager is Excel and a crystal ball, and it will always be like that, I think.
We at Meridian, we are quite unique globally because our funds are established for 25 years. So when we invest into an asset, we stay there for 25 years and manage them. It's unique. But that means that you are trying to sort of invent or forecast the future for 25 years, which is well beyond our horizon. Especially, we were talking about 25 years in Central Europe and how life has been changing a lot. So there is an illusion also in forecasting, because this Excel is a great invention, but it produces any result you want. You just have to put in the right numbers.
For sure.
So I think what you need good quality forecasting, but you can't really forecast. Well, after the crisis and in certain countries that were mentioned here, you can't forecast 1 year or 1 week, which is bad for business. But what you also need is good quality on the ground, strong management who can adapt to new situations. That's how you can not only forecast but manage the future. And that no
Right.
forecaster can replace that.
Speaking of new situations, so this is the third panel like this that I've moderated in the last couple weeks. I've been lucky to do 2 here in Bratislava. I did 1 in Belgium recently. There were many women in the audience. No women have asked any questions at any of my panels. So I would very much enjoy hearing from a different sort of voice. If there's any of you out there think, maybe I've got a question, I'd like to join the discussion. Any takers?
No, there is a Slovak startup called Slido, by the way,
Yeah.
and normally it's used to ask questions from the audience because people are just they do not like to ask
Okay.
personally. So they're using this system, Slovak startup.
I can't read it from
but
here.
But now they are just only commenting. So probably you should switch the capabilities and you know. So.
Well, in the absence of questions from the audience, please raise your hand if you think of one. I'd like to ask the panel how you're getting new voices into your conversation. Several of you have mentioned the pipeline, the need for people to study abroad, the need for people to find ways to get started. How do you bring in people who haven't traditionally been the study abroad speaker-uppers? How do you get them involved so you can take advantage of all of their skills?
I just want to correct a little bit. I said that I like people who have studied abroad, parts of the education which we are missing here. So management, administration. I mean, I still think that we have a very good technical education here, and so that's what I wanted to correct. Answering to your question, I think that it's very important to have a good analytical thinking and not to hire only junior analysts. But if I recall my venture capital partners, the youngest person, usually a woman, is a junior analyst. And often you have to have some people with experience to be an analytical person. So that's.
How do you keep those people in the pipeline? How do you keep them moving forward instead of getting discouraged and dropping out?
I mean, often in our pipeline, often people are coming with an idea, and they think that the idea could be solved. But you have an inflation of ideas. The problem is the people who can solve them, you know, and who can realize them. So sometimes an idea comes, and we try to tell them that please build a team, make some kind of proof that you can realize the project, and then we can invest into you. So we are trying to encourage them to move to a next level when we can really speak to them as a venture capitalist. Or, for example, What's really good, and it's happening now in Slovakia, but then also in Central and Eastern European countries. So, like people who have like earned their money, they are starting to invest as angel investors. They have a very specific skill in a very specific sector, and they help the company or the team to come to a certain, like let's call it venture capital level and so on. So that's very good to address the very specific part of the investment cycle, so like angel, venture capital, but private equity.
Right. Gordon, you spoke earlier about the government maybe being able to do more to prepare people and to prepare the situation for investors to come in. Can you see a way around this roadblock that Ivan has just said, where the junior people are told, come back when you have more experience, but they can't get the experience because their projects aren't getting through?
Obviously, nobody has found a solution. We have major exodus from many countries. And from Hungary, 5% of the population is estimated to be working abroad now, and this is all between sort of 18 and 40. So it's practically a full generation is missing. And if you can't get these people back within a few years, then you have a disaster in terms of pension system, sustainability, demography, and all that stuff. So it's a major issue. How can you get these people? I support people go abroad, study, or work a few years. That broadens their view, and that helps a lot. That would be great if they come back. But for them to come back, they have to find perspective. And and it happened in Poland to a large extent. I think in Poland, it had a major exodus of roughly 3 million people left the country. And then many of them came back, partly because they lost their job in the crisis, but they came back, and to a degree they are changing Poland.
Yeah.
So it can be positive if there is a reason to come back. If not, then it can be a disaster. Education system, I agree, that's the heart. Education is the future of every country. If you want to know what your country will look like in 25 years, look at the schools, because those who are now 10 years old will form and shape that country in 25 years, nothing else. So that's why the education system is key, and and some countries in the region were not very successful in modernizing or updating their education system. So many 18 years old are running away from uncompetitive higher education systems in their own country to somewhere else. And the brain drain can have lasting negative impact.
Daniel?
Two short comments. For me, it's a bit difficult because we are effectively an international company. We have 1,000 employees in Germany, 1,700 in Poland, of course, many in Czech Republic, many in Slovakia, newly in the UK. But talking about the investment part of our structure, really this is not a sphere where I would see a problem. And kind of blue chip people we have in the geography, definitely from Slovakia and the Czech Republic. I know a few guys from Hungary who are incredibly good. The blue chip people, the people who are smart and have lots of motivation, they are there and they are coming from the region, because we are still a hungry region. We are a region where people want to reach something and do feel the motivation. They want to, so that top level is of good quality, and I'm not worried at all. And by the way, people are coming to EPH, to the headquarters. Out of last 5, 3 were from London, coming back from London to work for us. The other thing, which is more important, is how to make sure really that the education system is working for the mass. I mean, that we have really people which we need for the industries, which are in the companies. We need people, technically educated people, but not necessarily the best ones who would work for you, but we need also good technically educated people who would work for VV. And that would be more my concern, to be honest. Blue chip people you find.
So, motivated crowd. We have 10 minutes. Do we have more questions and comments from the audience? Very shy today. Here's back to the States.
Okay. Maybe your thoughts on TTIP, its potential for the region, and the chances
So role of government in promoting trade outside the EU. Thoughts?
I'm happy to jump into that because I think Europe has a serious problem of strategic growth trajectory forecasting. And there are few things that would be very logical to do that could change that negative trajectory. One is more internal market, especially services, that would add probably 2% GDP over time, which would be a significant boost. And the other one is the trade deal, partly with the US, but to a lesser degree with Canada and Japan. But the US would be the most significant one. So these are logical and easy things. And the third one is to have a major boom of investment, which everybody talks about in terms of broader sense, infrastructure and education. But it's not happening. So these are the three obvious things that we should do. The money is there, the capacity is there, the political willingness should be there. In the US after November 4th, probably even stronger than before. We'll see. These should be low-hanging fruits for Europe, and they are not happening, and they should happen. So I'm a big promoter of all of these issues. And there is one more strategic thing, if I have one more minute.
Please.
There were not too many questions. So. Over a historic period of time, again forecasting, the level of economic development in a region or in a country and its sort of political weight in the world cannot go separate ways. So if your economic weight is decreasing, your ability to influence others and represent your interests will also decrease, because you can't maintain your military, your diplomacy, your technology, etc. So, and I think in the reshaping of our globe, there are two natural allies long-term. It's Europe and the United States, because long-term alliances can only be based on cultural similarities. If you have fundamentally different political, social, human culture, then your alliance can be interest-based, but it won't be long-term. So therefore, the trade deal would be one of those economic ties that could tie again stronger the link between sort of North America and Europe, and would make it a stronger interest representing body or alliance in a world where others will be much stronger to represent their interests.
Thanks. Daniel?
My two short comments in here would be that first, especially for Slovakia, I think to support the exports from Slovakia and hence support the foreign trade, I think Slovakia is trying to do its best, and I would tend to appreciate that, because really even the top political structure of Slovak politics are supporting Slovak exports. Of course, are constrained. For instance, the export financing has unfortunately natural limits in Slovakia, and the budget of Exim Banka is relatively limited. But from the perspective of willingness and genuine interest to assist, I think it's really there. So I would from that side, I would really tend to appreciate a lot. The other problem which we have, and we have it actually more in Slovakia than in the Czech Republic, and it doesn't exist almost in Poland, to my experience, is that if government is supporting any business and any export, which is effectively a great news for the country, and the country normally, including the journalists, should be cheering that we have achieved something, or that a Slovak company has achieved something on foreign markets. Here and there, you always, hear noises who and what for, and what was behind, and who is the owner, and who had met, and that the owner met last week somebody in a cafe, and you have all that omnipresent suspicion. What is behind, which is I think quite frustrating. It doesn't concern me necessarily.
The problem is that,
but this is frustrating. So I would appreciate the activity of the government, but unfortunately, that omnipresent suspicion concerns also these situations, and that is frustrating.
Ivan, you were
the
saying?
problem is that the cafe should be open to everybody. It should not be the
I
the part of the cafe
I
where.
have only a very limited experience with the system here, but I don't have a single doubt that any company that wants to export as a Slovak company abroad will get support of Slovak government. Seriously, I mean relevant company. Of course, if you have 5 people, it's difficult, but if you have somewhere, a few hundreds or 1,000 employees, I'm sure you will get the support. But again, and that's one of the biggest or one of the great problems of our society, is because our society is small, because our system are clientelistic. By the way, the French one is as well. I studied there.
Well,
but-
a free press that shines lights in dark corners is always a thing to be proud of as an institution.
I think the governmental interference here, I mean, one thing is just support export, but supporting export, I mean, the main export from Slovakia today, I guess, are not Slovakian companies. The long-term strategy for Slovakia should be that in I don't know, another 25 years, maybe have at least balanced out the Volkswagen and the Kias and the Samsungs with 3 or 4 large Slovakian companies who provide, who let the value stay in the country and not only passing, not only being money passing through.
I'm 100% supporting, but this is not the perception in Slovakia today.
Oh, no,
if government would be supporting Volkswagen, media would just, applaud. If you feel support to a private individual who built his own business, you will feel the suspicion. And when I use the term clientelistic business, sorry, just a short explanation. We are a small country where everybody know everyone.
I have
was
to
what
say,
I meant.
after 20 years in journalism, I think suspicion comes with the territory, because it is our job to ask questions as we ask questions
No,
of
it is
you.
not. It is not. We have invested in media, and I think the role of media is extremely important. But the problem is not a relevant focus and a relevant comments to a specific case. This is the overall omnipresent feeling that everything is suspicious. And every time when somebody from the country gets some support, it could be you. And you know that you behave, I guess, in an honest way. But anyway, I can tell you that if you get a subsidy from a state fund, you would see on the internet many comments, how it is possible, who do you know, who is your classmate. And this is something which is, I have to say, in that specific domain, really highly unfortunate and frustrating. So
I agree, and I think that's one of the key issues to solve, to add, to remove that sense of suspicion and add credibility to the system instead.
Absolutely.
So probably the solution is to act always in a full transparency. Then I do not care about if somebody writes on the internet, because then it's like.
But the politicians will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they will support you with a good intention, and then they will get all the blame.
Yes, that's possible.
I think it was Peter Esterházy who wrote once that there's a special kind of Central European paranoia, which sounds like, I feel somebody's following me, and it's true.
Good.
Ivan, we have 2 minutes left. Would you like to offer a couple of
1 minute.
thoughts?
We are going to the discussion of small and big companies, and I think that there should be some kind of mechanism, because in my work I see like companies with 2 or 3 million of turnover, which can become like 40 or 50 million of turnover in like 3 or 4 years. But they are in some kind of value of that, because banks are not helping them. They are not in the spotlight of the politician, because they cannot make a picture front of a big factory, but of a small factory, and like with 5 people. So probably there should be mechanism of a whole ecosystem, banks, media, big guys, small guys, to help those future leaders. When in 25 years we are going to discuss about the companies which we are trying to take care of right now, because I mean there will be nothing more to privatize. Like all the big things are going to be solved. So we have to reinvent which are going to be the big companies in next 25 years. If you check the list of the Fortune 500 companies, I mean, I think that half of them have not been there 20 years ago. So that's why we have to really, check what are going to be the next big guys, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Thanks so much. With that optimistic comment, thank you so much for coming to our panel. You've been a very attentive audience. I think there are sessions this afternoon, different things depending on what interests you. And thank you for your time. Thank you to our great panelists for the wonderful discussion.